Welcome back, everyone, to a brand new explainer. If you're fascinated by that wild intersection of gritty history and epic mythology, man, you are in for an absolute treat today. We're looking at one of the most famous, most terrifying, and honestly, most fiercely debated figures of the entire Viking Age, the legendary King of Sweden and Denmark, Ragnar Lodbrok. We've got a great setup prepared to help us untangle the epic mystery of this larger-than-life warlord. So get comfortable, focus in, and let's unravel this saga together. Okay, let's dive into this because we really have to start with the name itself. When you hear Ragnar Lodbrok, you probably picture this unstoppable, blood-soaked conqueror, right? Well, translated from Old Norse, Lodbrok literally means hairy breeches or leather trousers. No joke. One of the most terrifying figures in European history was essentially named Ragnar Hairy Breeches. But hey, before you laugh, the sagas tell us he earned this nickname by wearing these uniquely thick protective trousers to survive a fight with a giant venomous serpent. So suddenly, hairy breeches sounds a whole lot more practical, doesn't it? And that quirky nickname perfectly sets up part one, the legend of hairy breeches. We're moving straight from the funny translation of his name right into the absolute larger-than-life mythos of his character. You see, to understand Ragnar, you have to understand how the medieval world viewed him. According to the 13th century Icelandic sagas, like the Sögubrot, Ragnar was no ordinary Viking. He's described as the biggest and fairest of men. He had this incredible pedigree as the son of the legendary Swedish king Sigurd Ring, but it actually goes even higher than that. The texts claim his lineage traces directly back to Odin, the all-father of Norse mythology himself. So he wasn't just pure muscle. The sagas paint him as this semi-divine hero, blessed with immense physical strength. Yeah, but also with profound poetic wisdom. Basically, he was the ultimate Viking ideal made flush. Which brings us to part two. Sagas, serpents, and shield maidens. Because if you think his stories are just about standard warfare, you'd be highly mistaken. The legendary sagas actually focus heavily on his fantastical marriages and magical exploits alongside his battlefield conquests. Now, what's really interesting here is how perfectly his two epic marriages contrast, and how they both build his mythical status. On one side, we have Thora Borgahart. To win her hand, Ragnar literally had to slay a giant, venomous serpent that was guarding her home. Yep, that's where those famous hairy breeches came in handy. Then, after Thora passed away, he married Kraka, a woman of just outstanding beauty living with poor presence. But get this, Kraka was secretly Oslog, the hidden daughter of the legendary dragon slayer Sigurd Fafnisbane. So these aren't just historical marriages, they're literal alliances with myth and magic. And wow, did those unions produce a terrifying roster of renowned warriors. We're talking about Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, Vitsirk, and Ube. These sons grew up to be absolute forces of destruction. In fact, they became so wildly successful that Ragnar, driven by this intense, almost toxic ambition not to be outdone by his own kids, made a fatal, reckless decision. He decided he was going to conquer England with merely 2 ships. That sheer arrogance led directly to his legendary end. Defeated by the vastly superior forces of King Aela of Northumbria, Ragnar was thrown into a pit of venomous snakes to die. But he didn't beg for his life. No way. According to the Old Norse poem, the Krakkamal, his dying words were an epic boast. "The Aesir welcome me. Laughing gladly do I die." He delivers this line with total defiance, knowing his death in battle secures his entry straight into Valhalla, drinking mead with the gods. But while Ragnar may have died laughing, his enemies in England would soon be weeping. This leads us into part 3, The Vengeful Sons, where we leave the magical sagas behind and step right into gritty, brutal historical reality. King Ella's execution of Ragnar triggered an absolute cataclysm in 9th century history. In 865 AD, Ragnar's sons, who, by the way, unlike their father, are universally verified by historians as very real people, organized an unprecedented invasion force, the Great Heathen Army. They didn't just come to raid, they came to conquer and avenge their father. By 870 AD, Halfdan Ragnarsson took command, and in 871 AD, they fought the massive Battle of Ashdown. These vengeful sons completely redrew the map of the British Isles, establishing a Viking dominance that would last for generations. Let's move to part 4, Finding the Real Ragnar, and see how this all builds from tall tales into a genuine historical detective story. It is the ultimate question for us today. Was Ragnar Lodbrok actually a real person?
We know for a fact that Ivar the Boneless and Bjorn Ironside existed and wrought havoc across Europe. But when contemporary scholars look for their father, the singular Ragnar Lodbrok of the sagas, the trail kind of fractures. The prevailing academic consensus today is that the legendary Ragnar is likely a composite figure, basically a blend of several different historical men.
So whose lives were stitched together to create this super Viking? Well, scholars point to a few key historical candidates. First, we have Ragnar, a fierce Viking who besieged Paris in 845. Then, we have the Danish King Horik I and King Reginfrid. There's also a figure named Ragnar mentioned over in the Irish annals. Historians believe that leader chroniclers, particularly the 12th century Danish writer Saxo Grammaticus, took the terrifying exploits of all these separate warlords and wove them into one cohesive mythical narrative under the single name Lodbrok.
So, the crucial point is that while the magic might be fiction, the brutality inspiring it was entirely real. Consider the terrifying significance of the number 111. During that 845 AD siege of Paris by the historical Viking Ragnar, he attacked the forces of the Frankish king Charles the Bald. To incite absolute terror and to honor the god Odin, Ragnar took 111 Frankish prisoners and hanged them on an island in the River Seine. It's harrowing, verifiable moments of sheer terror, exactly like this, that cemented the foundation of the whole Ragnar myth.
And that brings us to the climax of our explainer, Part 5, An Immortal Legacy. When we connect these historical shards, the hanging of prisoners in Paris, the very real invasion of the great heathen army in England, we see exactly where the grand narrative of the sagas was born. The legend of Ragnar Lodbrok is literally a tapestry woven from the most awe-inspiring and terrifying moments of the 9th century.
Which leaves us with this final thought. History isn't just a ledger of what happened. It is fundamentally about what human beings choose to remember, how we process collective trauma, and how we immortalize greatness and fear. The victims of those 9th century raids saw demons. The Scandinavians saw demigods. In merging facts with myth, they created a legend that has survived over a millennium. It really makes you wonder, 1,000 years from now, which of our modern historical figures will be remembered as mere mortals, and which will be transformed into dragon slayers? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep seeking the truth behind the legends, and I'll catch you on the next one.